So for this video, I'm going to show a split squat series starting with a front foot elevated split squat isometric hold. For this isometric, you can do the most regressed version, which is a PVC assisted variation. You can also just use something like a PVC or a platform to hold on to or be inside of a squat rack just to get yourself into position and then let go or drop the PVC. Whenever you're getting set up, you want your feet to be far enough apart from each other lengthwise so that when you drop into the split squat, you're in a mid-range position. Both the front and back knee are bent at about 90 degrees. And you want to make sure that that back heel is facing the ceiling. It's not turned out or caved in. A lot of people, when they set up for a split squat, they'll start with this hip turned out. And when they get into a position, that back heel tends to still be in a direction facing behind them. So make sure that that toe is turned in, heel's turned out a little bit, and is now facing the ceiling whenever you get into the split stance position. If you feel good about this movement, you can drop the assisted, and then you can go to the next variation, which is just a front foot elevated split squat isometric. Really important that the chest is not collapsing. The chest is fairly upright. Hands are by side or on hips, not resting on the quads, and that the knees are still staying bent about 90 degrees. You're putting a little bit of pressure in the toes here and keeping whole foot pressure in this front foot. If the body weight movement is not challenging enough, you can also do a weighted front foot elevated split squat isometric, which has the same cues. The only difference between the body weight and the weighted front foot elevated split squat isometric is you still have 90 degrees bend in each knee. You're still trying to drive that heel up to the ceiling a little bit. Still want to maintain whole foot pressure in the front foot. This time your chest is upright, but you have a little bit more rounding in the upper back rather than potential shoulders back. And that's the only difference, holding for the allotted time. The next variation would be a front foot elevated split squat without an isometric. So one foot's up on the elevated platform, one foot is back. Still want to be bending when you get to the bottom position, 90 degrees in each leg, dropping and coming back up. Super important that the chest does not collapse as you move into the lunge position. And then when you're doing the movement, the back knee is driving down. Rather than lunging forward or backward, you want to be in this split stance position, driving the knee, the back knee, down to the floor. You can also perform the split squat just in a regular stance without being on an elevated platform. Chest remains fairly upright, still in a split stance position. When you get to a bent knee, when you get to the bottom of that rep, the knees are bent both 90 degrees, so front and back knee is at about 90 degrees. You want to make sure that that heel is not turned down, but rather turned up to the ceiling when you get into that split lunge. And you want to make sure that the chest stays upright the entire movement without collapsing during the exercise. A modification or variation off of the regular split squat is a contralaterally loaded split squat. And in this exercise, you're going to hold the dumbbell in the foot opposite, in the hand opposite to the foot that's in front of you. So if your left foot is in front, you'll hold the dumbbell in the right hand, same setup. Feet are going to be at a decent distance so that when you get to the bottom of the rep, both knees are bent 90 degrees. Back heel as you descend in the movement, turns up to the ceiling. It's not turned out. Chest is fairly upright, not collapsing during the rep, driving the back knee to the floor. Think less of moving forward and backward, but rather up and down. And this contralateral load will pull your hip into internal rotation to help move people in proper position for the exercise. The other variation is an ipsilaterally loaded split squat. When you perform an ipsilaterally loaded split squat, the only difference between that and contralateral is now the dumbbell is going to be held in the hand that is same to the foot that is in front. Same exact setup, making sure there's good length between the legs so that when you go into the bottom of that split stance position, each knee is bent at about 90 degrees. Heel is not turned out or in, but rather that heel, as you descend into the movement, is facing the ceiling, making sure that the hips are staying square, chest is fairly upright, it's not collapsing during the exercise, and you're driving the back knee down to the floor rather than forward or backward. This challenges hip internal rotation because the natural inclination to account for this weight here is to lean or turn the hip out. But instead we have to challenge internal rotation by pulling the opposite hip in and maintaining a neutral pelvic position in the split stance. I'm gonna have to edit this. I'm fucking tired. That's fine. Another split stance variation that you can do is a goblet hold split stance. Holding the dumbbell goblet squat or goblet style. Same setup for any split squat variation, which is making sure feet are far enough apart so that when you bend the knees are bending at about 90 degrees each. The heel is not turned in, but rather when you go into the descent of the split squat, the heel goes up, faces the ceiling. Chest does not collapse, but rather stays upright. Also doesn't excessively flare in this movement, really important here. Just keeping a normal rib cage stacked over pelvis neutral position, driving the back knee down to the floor.